Hi guys, so now we're ready for the second part of our introduction to the POPI Act. And I think you may understand now, if you haven't before, that the POPI Act is a data protection regulation, and it now requires all organizations, whether you are private or public, to protect the personal information data that you have been collecting and that you will probably continue collecting in the future. So the POPI Act just helps organizations to become more security conscious and take accountability for the protection of the personal information or the personal data that organizations have. Right? So we're not supposed to be afraid of POPI. POPI is in fact there to help us to ensure that we don't let the personal information that we have at our organizations fall into the wrong hands by not ensuring that we have policies in place to protect that personal data that we have. So I'm just going to run through a few steps that the POPI Act regulation expects all organizations to have in place by the 1st of July. So step number one is that POPI requires you to run training sessions and awareness campaigns with all your employees and with all your other stakeholders or role players that are involved. So you have to run training programs and awareness campaigns for your teachers, for the other staff members at your school, for your parents, and of course for your governance structure, the SGB. Then step number two, you need to appoint an information officer, and that information officer will become the lead person to manage the data protection systems that you have at your school. That information officer will also coordinate all the training and awareness campaigns that you run at the school. Thirdly, you need to have an information policy, and even if you have an information policy, you must now update it so that that policy is in line with the POPI Act regulations. Okay, so your information policy must have or must include, for example, your data protection policy, your personal information sharing policy, your password policy, your website privacy policy, and of course, there are many other policies that have to form part of your information policy. Then the last point I want to mention, or the last step that I'd like to mention, is the fact that you need to conduct an audit so that you know what personal information you are collecting and why you are collecting that information, who is doing the personal information collection at your organization or at your school, and then how are you processing that information and how are you storing that information, whether you are storing that information in physical files, whether you're doing it manually or whether you are doing it electronically and digitally. And then of course when you do that audit will help you to identify certain gaps and certain risks that are evident in the way you are managing or handling that personal information. So you can use that initial audit to do a comprehensive gap analysis and a risk assessment audit so that you can start filling those security gaps that you have in terms of how you're managing the data that you are collecting. Okay, so it's quite a bit of work, and it can be daunting, but like I said in the previous video, you have the right to call on your circuit managers. We have a labor relations department at the education department as well that you can access. And then, of course, there are many private organizations that are all geared up to help various organizations, including schools, on how to understand what the POPI Act is all about, how to conduct the training and run the awareness programs or campaigns, and then, of course, also to help you get your information policies in line with the POPI regulations, and so that you can be compliant with the POPI Act. Okay, because essentially, at the end of the day, you need to have a POPI compliance framework that will guide you as you implement that framework to ensure that you do indeed protect that personal information data that you are collecting or that you have collected. So, hopefully, this snapshot will help you to start thinking about POPI and start reaching out to various experts to help you organize your data protection information policies at your school. Have fun. You can let me know did this help, and what do you think is the way forward for your school. So on that note, here from School Corridor, I just want to say continue empowering yourselves with knowledge, continue trying to make sure that you have a fully compliant POPI framework at your school, and continue raising the bar at your school. On that note, cheerio.